Hi there, it's Ann Taylor Pittman, Executive Editor at Cooking Light. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I have a really fun dessert to share with you. It is milk chocolate yogurt with granola and blueberries. And while that title is a mouthful, we originally wanted to call it something much longer that was more descriptive. It's salted milk chocolate yogurt with dark chocolate granola and blueberries. It's a really delicious recipe. There are a couple of components. There's the yogurt part, there's the granola part, and then of course the blueberries. So let me get started here and show you how this comes together. You can make the granola on its own. It's so good. You might want to make a double or triple batch just to have on hand as your house granola. The yogurt is so delicious that also you may want to make that on its own. So that's a fun thing about this recipe. You could sort of customize as you see fit. So right now I'm going to start with the granola, and I'm just making the glue part. Just going to warm up some things. This is some olive oil, 2 tablespoons of olive oil. You can use extra virgin or a less flavorful olive oil. Then 3 tablespoons of honey. Honey is a key component in this granola that kind of helps it hold together and gives it some structure. And then 3 tablespoons, which is a fair amount, of unsweetened cocoa powder. So that is what creates this sort of wonderful dark chocolate flavor. That's a lot of cocoa powder for a relatively small amount of granola. And that, I mean that in a good way. It's a lot of cocoa powder that's going to give a tremendous amount of chocolate flavor without that many calories and or fat. So I'm just stirring this together over medium heat just until everything sort of comes together. The honey sort of liquefies and everything just sort of blends together. I'm going to let that go for just another minute or so. But let me get started over here mixing together the dry components for the granola. First of all, I have a baking sheet prepared with some parchment paper. Parchment paper is indispensable in the kitchen, I think, and I love the pre-cut sheets because they are so easy. Okay, so I have 1 cup of old-fashioned oats, just the regular rolled oats, 2 tablespoons of toasted sesame seeds. Now, if you can buy pre-toasted sesame seeds at the grocery store, but if you don't find those and you just have the white sesame seeds, just toast them in a dry skillet over medium heat for 2 to 3 minutes. Just kind of give it a good flick to keep things moving so it doesn't burn or overheat, just until it's nice and golden brown. Then I also have 2 tablespoons of turbinado sugar, 3/4 teaspoon of cinnamon, and then a 1/2 teaspoon of flaky salt. So we're using this flaky salt. You know, it has these nice big crystals. See if you guys can see that. You can definitely use kosher salt. You just will use less because, you know, volume for volume or measure for measure, kosher salt is going to be a little more concentrated than the flake salt. I'm using a 1/2 teaspoon in the granola.
And we have a quick question.
Oh, great.
If you're looking for flaky salt, what is it, like, what would it say on the package?
That's a great, I should have brought the package in here, darn it. So you can find different, so if you're going to a specialty store, you might see several different varieties of flaky salt. But the kind that you'll most often see at traditional grocery stores, I think Target carries it, is Maldon, M-A-L-D-O-N. It comes in a box, a white box, and it's really widely available. Again, if you don't have it, if you can't find it, that's okay. Use kosher salt. Just maybe start with about 1/2 the amount because it's going to be packed more tightly because the grains are smaller. Okay, so I've added the cocoa mixture here to my dry ingredients. Give it a good stir. While I'm stirring this together, I'm going to put a little pot of water on to boil. And I'll get back to that in just a second. So now I want to stir the granola ingredients together really well so that there aren't dry, uncoated pieces of the oatmeal. So take your time when you're stirring this together so that everything is well coated. That's gonna make for a nice, evenly flavored and delicious granola. And once that gets going, I have my oven preheated to 300 degrees. It's a pretty low temperature, and we have it low because we don't want, of course, to burn the granola. Okay, so that is well combined. I'm just gonna put it here on my prepared baking sheet and just sort of spread it out. Now here's the thing with this granola. You need to set your timer, okay? We're gonna bake this at 300 degrees for 15 minutes. Take it out, give it a stir, and bake it for 12 more minutes. Now the reason that the timer is so important is that the visual cues that we usually use for something like granola are not going to apply. We can't say bake until golden brown because it's already very dark because of the cocoa. So if you bake this until it changes color, I can guarantee you it's probably going to be burned. So go with the times that we state. Make sure your oven is at 300 degrees. If your oven runs hot and you know it runs hot, adjust accordingly. So let me pop this in to the oven. Again, 15 minutes, and then give it a stir, and then go for another 10 minutes. Okay, I'm gonna turn the heat up on this. Now, what I'm doing is I'm boiling some water. Once it comes to a boil, I'm gonna turn it down to a simmer, and this is gonna be my double boiler that I use for melting the chocolate. So we're making a milk chocolate yogurt. We start with 5 ounces of milk chocolate. I was just a little bit shy, so I have a little piece of semi-sweet chocolate to make up the difference, which is fine. And I'm just gonna chop it up. Now, I highly recommend going with a premium chocolate bar here as opposed to chocolate chips. You'll get a better texture and a better flavor. I actually have not tested the recipe using chocolate chips. Sometimes people have problems with chocolate chips seizing when they melt. Do you know what I'm talking about? Like when it just kind of like all of a sudden hardens and stiffens. But I know with a premium chocolate bar, you tend to have fewer problems with that. So I'm just chopping it up into smaller pieces so that the melting will go efficiently. We're doing it over a double boiler just for precautions. When you try to melt chocolate in the microwave, which certainly can be done, and we call for it in the magazine sometimes, you just have to be a little more careful. So since we're working with a more premium product here, we just want to make sure that it doesn't get ruined.
Anne, sorry,
Yep.
we have a quick question. Matilda wants to know what brand of chocolate you're using, or do you prefer?
Oh, hi, Matilda. I am using Lindt right here, L-I-N-D-T, just a chocolate bar from them. It's really nice, has a nice amount of cocoa fat, or cacao, sorry. And a nice amount of fat. So the thing about milk chocolate is it's a little bit creamier, a little bit fattier. If you use a dark chocolate, it's gonna be a little bit leaner, so to speak. But we're going with the milk chocolate here. Okay, so I'm just putting this into the bowl. My water is just about at a simmer. I'm gonna go ahead and put this on. And it will take it just a few minutes. Okay, so now it is boiling. I'm turning it down to a simmer because I do not want it to burn. It will take just a minute. Okay, so let me pull my other ingredients together here, clean up my workspace a little bit. Okay, so for the yogurt, so we're making a milk chocolate yogurt. It's a salted milk chocolate yogurt, so the rest of the salt is gonna go in here and it's gonna be amazing. Actually, I have some that I made ahead, which I'm gonna grab in a minute out of the fridge. I forgot to get it before we went live. Story of my life. I forget one thing, it seems like every time. It's fine. Okay, I'm gonna go grab that so you can see what it looks like. The chocolate will still be melting. Just bear with me 1 second. So I'll mix this up for you so you can see what it's like when you first mix it up. Here's one that I mixed up that I made maybe about an hour and a half ago, and it does sort of set up a little more. It's the texture of yogurt, or like a thick yogurt or a pudding. Has a nice kind of milk chocolate color. You know, it's not a dark, whoa, that is boiling. I don't want the water that hot. I don't know if you guys can see this, but it was boiling pretty vigorously. I don't want it that hot because it could scorch the chocolate. Okay, so 5 ounces of chocolate are melting here. We're using milk chocolate. It's a tiny smidgen of semi-sweet. That's not what the recipe calls for. And then 2 cups of whole milk Greek yogurt. So we're going with a full fat yogurt here because this is a dessert. We want it to feel indulgent and decadent. We want it to have that great sort of luscious mouthfeel. So that's why we're using that here. You can certainly try it with a 2%. I wouldn't advise going lower than that because it just won't feel, if you're going to all this effort to make a dessert, like enjoy yourself. It just won't feel quite as luscious as you want it to if you go for a fat-free yogurt. So the chocolate is melting nicely. There are just a few sort of solid chunks here. It's almost melted. Lovely. Like I said, this is a much gentler way to melt the chocolate than, say, going in the microwave. I don't know if any of you guys have had that problem before. I can't tell you how many times I have tried to melt chocolate in the microwave and ended up scorching it, gone just a little bit too long at that high temperature and scorched the chocolate. It's a very sad thing, especially if you don't have enough on hand to do another batch right away. Yeah, I think there was a birthday party for my kids where I was making a chocolate buttercream, and that happened, and there was so much going on. I had to drop everything, go to the store, you know, that type of thing. Okay, so let me set this aside, and let me show you guys how this comes together. Okay, so we have our chocolate that's melted. It's really smooth, really gorgeous. I'm gonna set this aside and move to my whisk. So this is 2 cups of yogurt. I'm just gonna start whisking it in, little at a time. I don't wanna plop all of it in at once because that could make the chocolate seize. If you add too much cold stuff at one time, it can make the chocolate solidify before you're ready. So it's almost like, you know how you temper eggs when you're making custard or pudding by putting a little bit of hot liquid into your beaten eggs. This is sort of like a similar thing. You're putting a little bit of the cold stuff into the warm melted chocolate, a little bit at a time.
And a quick question.
Great.
If your chocolate does seize at any point during this process or during the melting process, is there anything you can do about it?
That is a great question. So after you've melted, if you have success melting your chocolate and then it starts to seize when you add the yogurt, just stop adding the yogurt, put the bowl back over the double boiler, make sure it's at the water's at a low simmer, and just kind of stir it around until it reliquefies. Now, if your chocolate seizes as you're melting it, it depends. It depends on whether or not you can save it, depends on how far it has gone in its seizing. Now, if it's scorched, it's kind of beyond repair. If it seizes a little bit, you can sometimes add a little bit of coconut oil, just a little bit, like half a teaspoon, and that will reliquefy it. Now, that also kind of turns the chocolate into magic shell. You know, the magic shell, that's kind of a trick, is if you melt chocolate and add a little bit of coconut oil, it solidifies on contact with cold things like magic shell. So you have to be very careful not to add too much coconut oil. Maybe even start with a 1/4 teaspoon. Okay, so that was a great question. The last thing I'm gonna add is some salt. So remember, this is salted milk chocolate yogurt, which is so wonderful. Those flaky crystals of salt are gonna mix in, have kind of a big presence on the palate as you eat the milk chocolate yogurt.
And
Wonderful.
We have another question.
Great.
So Pamela is watching from Alaska, and she wants to know, can you freeze this chocolate yogurt for a frozen yogurt?
That is a really good question, Pamela. I'm so sorry. I have no idea. I think that this would work like if you wanted to make fudge pops, like fudgesicle type popsicles. I think it should work. Everything in me tells me that should work just fine. Now, if you're asking about freezing it and then thawing it, like freezing it as a make-ahead thing and then thawing it later, I don't know that I would recommend that. I'd be worried about what might happen to the texture of the yogurt. But if you're making ice pops or fudge pops, I think it should work great. Sorry, I haven't tried that, but I think I might. I might actually take some of this and try freezing it because I think that would be pretty fantastic. Okay, so I have some of my components. So this is what I just stirred up, and this is the one that I made earlier. It's just a little bit thicker. It holds its shape a little better. There's nothing wrong with doing this. It's just that it's not super cold, and I would recommend just putting this in the fridge for about an hour, or you can make it a day ahead even, or a couple of days ahead. So let me grab, I have some granola that I made earlier. Now look at this. Isn't that gorgeous? So here is our granola. It's a really simple granola. It's just oats, sesame seeds, some sweeteners, a little bit of olive oil, and then the cocoa. So it's kind of a bare bones granola, which is wonderful, but it also has such rich chocolate flavor. That's so wonderful. So let me make a couple of these desserts here. I'm going to start with some of that yummy chocolate yogurt. Got some on the side. That's okay, I'll just turn it around. So we started with Greek yogurt. We added the melted chocolate and the salt. The salt is what's so great. I hope you guys are like me and appreciate, you know, those desserts that have a good bit of salt for flavor balance and just sort of enhance everything. Now I'm adding the yogurt. Oh my goodness, I did make a mess here. Oh, that's all right. So you have creaminess of the yogurt, and you have that hearty crunch of the granola. So when you pull by the way, when you pull the granola out of the oven, after it's cooked for 15 minutes, stir, 12 more minutes, when you pull it out, it's gonna still be a little bit soft. It will harden and become crunchier as it cools. So don't worry if it doesn't seem crunchy enough. It will turn crunchy as it cools off. And then these wonderful blueberries go on top. Now blueberries are in season now. It's a perfect time for blueberries. You could use any fruit that you like. You could use strawberries. You could use, I mean, in the wintertime, you could use pears if you wanted. You could use citrus, would be interesting with this. It's just a really lovely dessert. So that's it. That is our milk chocolate yogurt with granola and blueberries. Again, it's a fun thing. You can make the granola. It's so good. Like I said, you might want to make it to have it on hand to have with your morning yogurt. There is some sugar in it, but it's not super high in sugar, in added sugar, so it's a great thing to have on hand. You can keep it in an airtight container for about 5 days at room temperature, and it will be great. So you can make it for the week. So I hope you've enjoyed that. I hope you learned some things that you might want to use in your kitchen. Thank you so much for joining me. If you're watching on Facebook, please like and share this video. And if you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe so that you'll get notifications when we go live. Thank you so much. I'll see you next week.